English translation 213th contact, Tuesday 2nd December, 1986, 03:17 hours.
You have already endeavored for quite some time around the interests of Jmmanuel, and also clarified the things around his tomb site. So you know, just like I do, where his tomb site is. Recently, archaeologists and others step into appearance, claiming that they, with great probability, have found the tomb. Does that correspond to the facts?
The fact that the tomb, respectively the tomb cave, is sought for corresponds to the truth. But the correct site was not found because some time ago I had destroyed this by order of the High Council, and to be sure, completely, whereby the hillside also collapsed and buried everything. The reason for this was so that no new Christian cult site could arise from this. This would be the case, and would have happened with certainty, if the tomb cave had been found. A new malicious cult would have arisen from this, which would have taken on even worse proportions than what is the case today with the alleged birthplace of Jmmanuel in Bethlehem. As you know, the site was not even where today's Christian cults are held. Regarding the alleged birthplace, etc. However, this does not bother the cult superiors, so they will not accept this truth and also will not disclose it. But so, it will be that the tomb cave of Jmmanuel will continue to be sought for, and already a place has been located, which should serve as Jmmanuel's tomb site, but inexcusable mistakes and unreal wishful thinking play a very important role in this. But through this, the researchers and wannabe researchers make sense of unrealistic facts, which are devoid of any truth. Because for quite some time, nothing more is noticeable or traceable on the slope's terrain, where the burial place caved in, as a result of the destruction of the tomb and the slope's collapse. Nevertheless, false and misleading research will continue to operate, namely into the third millennium, where for a longer time it will be erroneously maintained that the tomb site of Jmmanuel was actually found. And just concerning this tomb cave, in which you found the scrolls of Judas Iscariot, a few more things will happen in the coming time, around the middle or the end of the last decade of this century, which will confirm my words. You will actually get to know a very interesting and committed young man, who will make an effort to do these things if you inform him about the burial site and about the destruction of it. At the moment, he is still in his younger years, but in the course of time, he will become a very well-known man with regard to extraterrestrial flying objects and all things connected with them. Also, he will take up your and our contact history and will represent this worldwide. Yet this will only happen with difficulty and on difficult detours, which will be due to your wife, who has already worked for some time in secret as well as in open form against you and your mission, and who regularly carries out traitorous things that cause you and the group members harm and strife. However, he will be the man who will also perform investigations in Jerusalem in connection with the Talmud Emmanuel and Isa Rashid, and who will also find out that Emmanuel's tomb site and the aforementioned hillside are actually destroyed. He will then also record this fact photographically.
Those are some pieces of news again. Evidently, you have had rather decent looks into the future, or even traveled into the future. But may one ask, who this mysterious man will be? I mean, from where he comes and what his name will be.
That is no secret. He lives in Germany and is named Michael Hesemann.
I am surprised. And since we are already at it, when I was allowed to travel with Ascot back into Jmmanuel's time and also actually meet him, whereby I could speak with him using the language converter, there, he told me his life story, which was very different from what is maintained in the New Testament. With certainty, it arose from his explanations that he was in no wise religious, and therefore was not a religious faith-bringer or religious revolutionary. Actually, he was a revolutionary, he said so himself, but not in the sense of a religious form, but rather in relation to the true teaching of the Spirit, as this is also clear from the Talmud Emmanuel. He said that he was very unpopular with the superiors, the rulers as well as the scribes, etc., and that his life was endangered as a result of his revolutionary teaching, for he enlightened the people and advocated for their freedom in every respect. He did this in such a wise because, on the one hand, this was his mission that he had to fulfill here since ages ago, across different personalities and across different reincarnations of his spirit form, and on the other hand, because this was also the desire of his parents, Mary and Joseph, who did not hold to the old traditional and falsified teachings. And as I could learn from Emmanuel, when I asked him about it, the story of the carpenter's son is not correct, for his foster father, Joseph, had not been a simple carpenter, but rather the owner of a small carpentry business, with various workers who fulfilled his orders for him. Joseph had already learned the craft as a carpenter from the ground up with his father, who had already originally placed a ship carpentry business on the legs. Thus, Joseph and Mary, as well as Emmanuel and his brothers and sisters, had not been simple folk from the common people, but according to Emmanuel, they would have enjoyed a degree of prosperity, which also allowed for it that Father Joseph and Mother Mary, as well as all children, could learn to read and write.
Meier's recollection of the tomb site.
Around 1960, Isa Rashid was prompted by the same ETs who later contacted Meier to locate the tomb site where the Talmud Emmanuel TJ lay buried. However, from what Meier later learned, Rashid did not then take any action to explore the site or dig his way into it, and soon forgot just where it was. In 1963, however, when Meier was visiting him, and they were walking along outside and south of Jerusalem's old city, Meier was himself prompted to look out at the hillside and noticed a small dark cleft or hole up on the slope, partially obscured by bushes. According to Meier's recollection, in August 1997, this hole was about 30 centimeters or a foot on a side. He reached into his pack-sack for his flashlight and peered into the hole to notice that it continued inwards. So he proceeded to dig away rocks and earth until the hole was large enough that they could crawl inside. Meier remembers that a shrub growing next to this entrance was a meramais plant. After more exploring inside the tomb site, they noticed something buried underneath a flat rock, and it turned out to be the TJ scrolls, encased in resin, along with a few small artifacts. Meier's foreword within the translated TJ document continues the story from there, but gives no description of the tomb, which Meier learned later had been the tomb of Joseph of Arimathea, which is mentioned in the Gospel of Matthew. To the best of his 34-year-old recollection, Meier drew the sketch below of a plan view of the tomb. A member of his support group, Phi Gu, labeled it in English. The tomb is recollected to have been 3.5 to 4 meters in length. The outside slope of the hill is labeled as having been covered with rock, dirt, and bushes. In the rear of the tomb, there was a narrow tunnel leading out to what had once been a second entrance, long since blocked with earth. This smaller second entrance would have faced out onto the slope around a bend from where the tomb's main entrance had been. This was the entrance Chak exit, through which Emmanuel received medical attention from Joseph and some Hindu friends he had sought out, and from which they exited very early in the morning 3 days later, according to the Talmud Emmanuel. This picture is consistent with guards actually having been posted at the tomb, as in Matthew 27:65 to 66, to safeguard it from any who would enter in and steal the body. The TJ indicates that this posting of the guards occurred a day or two earlier than in Matthew Moore, in keeping with the Gospel of John's timing, and so did not occur on a Sabbath, when chief priests and Pharisees would have been reluctant to send a deputation to Pilate to ask for the guards. It is not inconceivable that those who helped Emmanuel's recover within the tomb could slip into the secret entrance on the side without being observed or suspected of anything by the guards. Apparently, this tomb site has not yet been explored by archaeologists. Ufologist Michael Hesemann of Düsseldorf, Germany, editor of magazine 2000 Plus, explored the general area where the tomb was located in July 1998. He retracted the route that Meier and Rashid had traversed in 1963 to the best of Meier's recollections, while in contact with Meier by cellular phone. It is located along the south slope of the Hinnom Valley, not too far from its confluence with the Kidron Valley, and within the Akeldama tombs area, south of the old city of Jerusalem. This had been a burial ground for foreigners, and Joseph of Arimathea likely was a foreigner, since the location of Arimathea remains unknown. According to an article by Gideon Avni and Zvi Greenhut in Report Number 1 of the Israel Antiquities Authority, the Akeldama Tombs, 1996, the confluence of the Kidron and Hinnom valleys, south of the old city of Jerusalem, contains one of Jerusalem's richest concentration of rock-hewn tombs. This area, located in the periphery of the village of Silwan, was one of the main burial grounds of Jerusalem. The use of the south part of the Hinnom Valley as burial grounds for foreigners is mentioned by Antoninus Martyr, who visited Jerusalem in about 560 CE. Apparently, years after the Potter's Field was renamed the Field of Blood Akeldama, it became enlarged to encompass adjacent areas of pre-existing tombs, including the tomb site of Joseph of Arimathea. The Akeldama site is mentioned by that name in Acts 1:19. From what Hesemann learned from Meier, he had been informed by one of the Pleiadians, Pleiaren Florina, in June of 1998, that sometimes after 1973 they had caused a landslide to occur down and over the hillside containing the tomb site. If so, this would be very consistent with their strategy of ensuring that they do not force truth upon people who are not in any wise prepared to accept it. And one way of doing this is to allow original evidence to be destroyed while allowing truth in the form of secondary evidence to be available. Hesemann believes he located the landslide-caused rubble ravine within the Akeldama tombs region, which marks the approximate location. The photograph below, courtesy of Michael Hesemann, indicates this area, with the probable site lying a little below the heavy arrowhead.
AI colorized photo?
The photo looks due south and was shot from just outside the present south wall of the old city. Hesemann was impressed that although Meier has not been back there to view the region, the site he described over the cell phone contained the landslide rubble ravine. It would seem futile, even if permission could be gained, to attempt to detect what is left of the tomb site underneath the rubble, as all the artifacts inside it had been removed in 1963.
Thus, Joseph was an independent craftsman with his own business, so to speak. And just as independent were also Emmanuel's brothers, who pursued their own crafts. And as Emmanuel said, he, too, was very independent and autonomous, was an expert of reading and writing, and earned his living through the spreading of the spiritual teaching, aka creation energy teaching, for which he received donations, which he did not administer to himself, however. Rather, He let these be administered by one of his disciples.
Those are issues that are familiar to me.
Aha. Then you should also know that it was in no wise the Jewish people who bore the guilt for the fact that Emmanuel was sentenced to death by the cross. In fact, it was such that the Roman garrison ruled in Jerusalem at that time, and its laws possessed validity. Only the Jewish scribes and the Jewish leaders were actually guilty of the fact that Emmanuel was sentenced to death. Although, a huge misunderstanding also contributed to this, when Emmanuel was asked the question as to whether the accusation was correct. When he said, "You said it," he did not mean that the alleged accusation was true, but the meaning of his words was that he meant that the questioner said it. And it was precisely this misunderstanding that was the deciding factor for the guilty sentencing. The scribes and the rulers, however, who fought vehemently against Emmanuel's teaching, were true Jews, and they were the actual ones who strove to eliminate Emmanuel, and to be sure, finally and for all time, through an execution. At the same time, the Jewish people themselves had nothing to say here, because they were forbidden to interfere in any imponderable court matters, etc. Nevertheless, as spectators, the people, as a rule, were allowed to do so, but as I said, they would not have had any authority for a verdict. But as always, it was also the case with those who were authorized that under them, there was a certain percentage of the mob that was strongly greased with pieces of silver from the Jewish scribes and elders, as well as from the synagogue bigshots, etc., in order to cry out for the death penalty when those who were responsible for sentencing, and thus not the Jewish people, were asked for the verdict. Thus, it was the paid-up and fired-up mob that cried out for crucifixion. Therefore, the Jewish people bore absolutely no guilt for this. In fact, it was also the case that the actual process was carried out by the Jewish elders, priests, scribes, and other public officials, with the chief priests possessing great power. They were indeed the main ones who wanted to dissuade Emmanuel from his mission efforts, and, as I said, by all of their available means. But all of these who were responsible cannot be regarded as Jewish people, who, in many respects, were actually and truly more on Emmanuel's side than on the side of the chief priests, elders, scribes, and other public officials, for under these, very many of the Jews suffered. But the fact that the blame for Emmanuel's crucifixion is placed upon them is based on deliberately false political, theological, and thus religious accusations, which should serve the purpose, and which had the intention, of denigrating the Jews and lifting up Christianity high into the sky. And precisely from this arose the hatred of the Jews, to which millions of Jews and Jewish friends fell victim in the Second World War, through the inhumane and degrading madness of the final solution. What is still to be said concerning the trial before Pilate probably needs no great explanation, for the whole thing was just a formality, in order to satisfy the Roman justice and law. But what is to be said in relation to the first trial by the Jewish officials, who partly consisted of high priests, scribes, and elders who influenced the rest? It was, indeed, the case that it was an effective process, even though this has long been challenged by various sides. Sfath taught me all this.
You are very detailed, and everything is completely accurate.
Now, in this whole connection, only Emmanuel's journey to Kashmir in India is missing and his work there, as well as his death at the age of about 115 years, and his burial. It is repeatedly asserted that this does not correspond to the truth, and that Hazrat Mirza Ghulam Ahmad of Qadian, the founder of the Islamic sect Ahmadiyya, had told fibs with the story that he had discovered Emmanuel's grave in Srinagar, India. As Sfath already explained to me, this corresponds at least to a form of reality, because the founder of the sect was not actually the discoverer of the tomb. Rather, a man named Kanishka Rashtrakuta found the tomb in the year AD 746. All this is vehemently denied, however, by all sorts of scientists and wannabe scientists, as well as by would-be know-it-alls.
That will also continue to remain so, for know-it-alls and wrong scientists, etc., never die out. Nevertheless, what Svath explained to you undoubtedly corresponds to the truth because we have clarified these issues very precisely, and thus, there is no doubt that Jmmanuel had worked in India, was also married there, and fathered several children, of which a son went to Jerusalem during his older years and hid Judas Iscarioth's scrolls in Jmmanuel's tomb, where you then found them in 1964 when Isa Rashid led you there.
Thanks for your information. Then something else. The creational spirit form of the person is wrongly designated as the soul, but at the same time, the value of the psyche embodies this, according to today's better understanding and sense. Now, the spirit form, respectively what the person designates as the soul, which is capable of wandering according to Christian and other religious faiths, even the so-called soul wandering, is denied, especially by medical science and by many other would-be knowledge directions, as well as its ability to be reincarnated. How long will it be until the incorrigible ones acknowledge the fact, as it is even set forth by the spiritual teaching, aka creation energy teaching, that the spirit form actually exists and is arranged into reincarnations?
With great certainty, the 20th century will bring no scientific insight relating to this. However, it will look different after the turn of the millennium, as a look into the future of a related form has proven.
Then we will see. One asked about Glenn Miller. He was a jazz musician who disappeared one day during the war, without a trace, and was declared as missing. Can you give any information about this? Because to this day, it is still puzzling as to where this Glenn Miller disappeared.
About that, I can explain a few things to you, as it concerns a man who was a musician and, thus, one who falls into our art records. Glenn Miller was inadvertently killed by his own people, that is, by Allied forces, on his way from England to France. He was on his way to Paris to attend a Christmas celebration. He flew his flying apparatus very low over the English Channel. As American Lancaster flying machines dropped their surplus bombs into the English Channel, without the crews noticing that beneath them a smaller flying apparatus crossed their flight path. This one, in which Glenn Miller sat, was hit by the dropped bombs, upon which it exploded, was torn into the smallest pieces, and then plunged into the sea. The small pieces of debris were scattered hundreds of meters, while Glenn Miller was completely torn apart into the smallest particles. This is the real truth, which has no relation at all to the false story that Glenn Miller, for indefinable reasons, died in the arms of a prostitute in Paris. Unfortunately, this misrepresentation had also been circulating in our archives, which also could have resulted in misunderstandings, to which even our people could be forfeited if they would only examine a few facts and not the whole complex.
It is nice that mistakes can even occur with you in such matters, which might be enough to prove that even you are not omniscient or omnipotent. Thus, I am glad to hear your confession.
We stand by our mistakes.
A strong feature of yours. Unfortunately, with the Earth humans, that is not exactly a strength, for they do not like to admit mistakes. Rather, they presume themselves as flawless and as better than everyone else, to whom they point out any mistakes.
That is well known to me. What I still wanted to report to you is that I received copies of your 5 novels from Ptah, which I could not refrain from reading, and I find them very good. And because I know very many things from your life, I have naturally also established that you worked various experiences and events out of your life into the novels, whereby you have certainly undertaken alterations and stylizations standard to novels. I have known for a long time, as I just said to you, that you have led a very adventurous and often dangerous life. Also, in the course of your younger years, you were bound 3 times with female companions in an open and unofficial matrimonial form. Ah, am I permitted to even speak of this?
There's nothing to be said against it, my friend, also when old memories thereby break through, as has already happened through your words and releases aching in me. Yet that is normal, and therefore nothing stands in opposition if you want to speak about it. I have overcome the sorrow and the sadness, therefore only an ache still surfaces when the memories come.
Then may I ask you about it?
Naturally, nothing stands in opposition to that.
Thanks. It is difficult for me to ask the questions.
Simply bring it forward as you think.
Ah, how? I would ask you, oh well, it was indeed so that all 3 of your spouses, companions of your early years, would be wrested, torn from you.
Do not be so ponderous, my friend. Yes, what you say is true. It first happened in Algeria when I made an open alliance with Samira, an Arab girl, and went with her through the desert, away from her family, to return to Europe. Then in a small oasis it happened. Samira was bitten by a poisonous snake and died from it a short time later. There was neither a doctor nor any people in the small, nameless oasis. Only 3 palm trees and some undergrowth, as well as a damp spot in the sand, which I dug up, after which some water collected in the hollow. Alone with Samira's body, I dug a pit with my dagger and buried my companion in it. Grieving, I spent some time at the site, then moved on and returned to Europe, where I did not stay long, however, and set off again on unknown paths in the Middle and Near East, that is to say to Arabia, and later to India. 1.5 years after Samira's death and burial, I met Nadia in the south of India, an Indian girl who belonged to the Hindu religion, which was a stark contrast to Samira's Islam religion. Taking a long trip with Nadia into a mountainous jungle, we became a couple and bonded. After a few days, we rested by a river where I built a small hut in which we lived. Then it happened, it was the monsoon season, that a heavy thunderstorm raged somewhere, causing the river to swell and rage within a very short time, just as I had climbed up a tree on a hill to explore the nearer and wider surroundings. At the same time, Nadia was in the hut preparing a meal, when I saw from the tree how the foaming floods of the river raged towards me with a tremendous gurgling and roaring. Obviously alerted to this, I saw Nadia step in front of the hut and let out a shriek. That was the last I saw and heard of her, because 2 or 3 seconds later the raging waters shot over the small hill where the hut and Nadia were standing and swept them away, disappearing into the floods.
Palms grave Samir.
Rocking in the evening breezes, bending in the raging storms, stand the palms of the little oasis around in the sparse grasses. A little hill, not too big, today blanketed with smooth moss, begat from events of the past, from the human struggle against space and time. However, also from love, happiness, and blessings that were but unexpectedly extinguished in a rain of death. Guided, battered from destiny's hand, it claims the soul from life as a pledge, to enter into splendid eternity, to find peace from earthly conflict. The little hill, however, blanketed with moss, begat from an inhumanly hard loss. In the lonely grave beneath the palms over which were spoken the holy psalms rests the beloved in a distant land who was snatched through a powerful hand. In an hour of happiness and love. Yet now, Samira, rest and have peace.
Tuesday, the 5th of May, 1964. Al-Basra, Iraq, Edouard. Nadia.
For Nadia, who I loved, I built a house by the stream, yet nature triumphed and quenched everything out again. The current ripped away the bank, took all my worldly goods, the love and the dreams, they sank in the flood. Through a deadly quake the stream became a grave. for Nadja's short life to a wet coffin.
Saturday, the 9th of May, 1964 Mirjava, Iran, Eduard.
I did not know these events exactly. It unleashes sorrow in me to see you like this as you have explained everything to me. You always still feel sadness and pain, even if you say that you have overcome everything. So you do not have to go on either. Because it is enough for me to know that your third companion, Angela, lost her life at the hands of murderers in a small oasis in the Iraqi desert, as you described it in one of your novels. That is all right, dear friend. Somehow I find it good that you have partly written out these events, also when you had to partly alter them into a novel.
Thereby it helped me very much to process everything, even if it is not also the case that I could forget it, as I could not forget many other things, situations, occurrences, and events. But when my memories mount, I can simply not master the ache. So, you are certainly correct when you say that mourning and pain are always still present, yet they are even no longer in the wise as at the time of the events, as I fell into the deepest abyss. And I know that this ache will still accompany me my entire life.
Whereto unfortunately still further pain and mourning as well as disappointment will come into being because you cannot avoid the coming things and events, being much betrayal and envy, falseness, lies and deceit, as well as the betrayal of love and trust and other things, as also not your obligation, because you must bear everything so you can fulfill your mission. But I want to say to you, whereby you must already be prepared from today on, so that you are armed and will not fall to pieces, because there will be hard events and situations that you have to face. But meanwhile, for my part, I know you very well and know that you will withstand everything, because, through work, you have achieved skills to confront the things rationally and always to step out against things with logic and reason. And indeed as well then when you know in advance what is coming, as if it encounters you unexpectedly.
All right, enough about that. May I still ask you something? The matter is of general interest, because it has often been asked of me whether I knew anything regarding the sect guru Sri Rajneesh, also known as Bhagwan, who is actually called God. On my part, I have christened him Bhagwan. He functions with his horde sex, with which I mean group sex. Bhagwan actually comes from the old Indian word Bhagavan, which simply means God or the Almighty. And this Bhagwan Bhagwan is actually called Sri Bhagavan. But to my knowledge, he bears the name Chandra Mohan Rajneesh. Unofficially, his sex sect, which it is in truth, calls itself the Neo-Sannyas movement. In 1981, Bhagwan established himself, along with his sect followers, in Oregon, USA, where he founded the city Rajneeshpuram, where he was banished and expelled from again last year, however, and since then, he's been searching for a new hideout in different countries. This, after his sect movement broke apart, when his long-standing confidant and mistress, Ma'anand Sheila, whose other name is Sheila Silverman, left Rajneeshpuram in America with a few followers in 1985, so more than a year ago. But after this, she was already extradited to the USA this year and was charged with an offense. The question now, what does this sex cult jackass continue to do?
I have concerned myself with this man and his sect and still continue to do so. In this regard, I have also held a look into the future, from which it has arisen that next year, so in 1987, Rajneesh will return to Pune in India, where he already worked before. As early as 1969, he let himself be revered by his followers as Bhagavan, which is interpreted in some circles as renouncer. Then, starting in 1989, he will let himself be revered as Osho because already in the month of November of last year, When he was deported from the USA, the plan matured in him that he would newly establish his sect. Then, in 1989, the Osho movement will arise from this, the so-called Osho Commune International. But this movement will not last for long because already on the 19th of January, 1990, he will depart from this life in Pune, after which the sect will be continued by a clearly defined circle of women and men. So in 1995, there will already be more than 200,000 sect followers worldwide. The new leaders of the sect will systematize Rajneesh's teachings, which will consist of about 600 written discourses. At the same time, a practice of piety will be introduced, which will also include a calendar of festivals and have a systematic development of a centralized organizational structure. While Rajneesh has been preaching a spontaneous teaching until now and will also do so in the new movement, those who are responsible for the continuation of the sect, however, will make it a form of institutionalized religious community and teaching.
Thank you for your explanations. But now, another question in reference to the GDR. As you once told me recently, the German Democratic Republic will fall in the coming years, respectively be dissolved, as a result of the so-called Peaceful October Revolution, as it will be called, as you said. In what year will this be?
The peaceful revolution will begin in October of 1989 and will lead to the fall of the wall on the 9th of November. On the 31st of August 1990, the Unification Treaty will be completed, which will lead to the final dissolution of the GDR.
Also, dear, thanks for this information. But now, again a question relating to a sect. You once told me that along with the Sannyasin sect, yet another sect of Indian origin will become a talking point, but not in a sexist form, as in the Bhagwan sect. The originator should be a namesake of the Indian sitar artist, Ravi Shankar. What comes from this?
It concerns the Indian guru Sri Sri Ravi Shankar, as he likes to be called, who claims to have had an enlightenment in 1982, but this corresponds to an untruth. Allegedly, he spoke no word for 10 days and, during this time, developed Sudarshan Kriya, a method of relaxation and cleansing through which, according to his erroneous teachings, 80% of all excretions from the human body should take place via the breath, which is not true, of course. Nevertheless, the method is good and wholesome, for the breathing exercises have preventive effects. For example, the risk of stroke and the risk of neurological diseases and diabetes, etc., can be reduced by these. But this is the case with all meditative breathing exercises, respectively breathing mediations, when these are carried out in the right kind and wise. So this must be acknowledged as an advantage, but this still does not move the sectarian into a better light at all. A sect remains a sect, and every sect is founded on false teachings, to which unstable and irrational people fall victim, who, unfortunately, are very often found among the academics, officials, and artists, etc. So this means that this sect of the Guru Sri Sri Ravi Shankar will spread itself through such people in the coming time and will be advocated by many followers, who will be recruited from among the business people, movie stars, models, engineers, doctors, medical professionals, government officials and public, etc. This sect and its members will act worldwide through a lot of property and will provide assistance in some places, like in the coming war zones in the Balkans, when murder and destruction will rule in Kosovo and in virtually the whole area of Yugoslavia, released and ordered by the criminal Serbian politician, Slobodan Milosevic, who will bear the name Death Dictator in certain circles, and who will bring endless death and suffering over all of Yugoslavia, but especially in Kosovo. But for this, he will be called to account around the turn of the millennium by the so-called International Court of Justice.
You actually tell me more than I wanted to know. But you have not told me where the real center of the sect will be and what it will be called.
AOL, which means Art of Living. The country is India, of course, whereby, however, up to the turn of the millennium, about 140 countries around the world must come to terms with the fact that they are overflowing with more than 1.5 million sect followers.
That is a lot. But it is always so with sects because erroneous teachings draw people in better than the truth, logic, and reason. Thus, erroneous teachings are the best props to find followers and believers of all walks of life, and to bind these to themselves.
You speak a true word, which is absolutely correct.
What is actually with the beast 666, which functions in a form of prophecy as an evil dictatorship, which should come from Belgium?
With this old customary prophesied beast, which will bear the number of evil and negativity, it concerns in the coming time the so-called European Union, in short, called the EU, which will be a European-wide dictatorship that will be decided on and established with a treaty on the 1st of November, 1993, with a so-called Maastricht Treaty. Then, along with this, there will be created a political and economic union of the member states of the advancing European Economic Community, the EEC, respectively the European Community, the EC, whose objectives will be the promotion of social and economic progress, with no internal boundaries existing anymore, and the creation of an economic and monetary union. In addition, what will eventually be strived for later is a common foreign affairs policy and a common security policy of the member states, as well as a common defense policy. It will also be planned for the citizens of the member states to create a European Union citizenship. Also, the areas of the military and the judiciary, as well as road transport and agriculture, as well as the industrial economy, should ultimately be determined by the powerful figures of the EU, which will have its residence of power in Brussels, Belgium. But the whole thing will be in no wise democratic, but will assume dictatorial forms, where the powerful ones negotiate and make decisions among themselves, whereby many freedoms of the citizens and countries still remaining will be limited or will even disappear. Both the EU member states and their citizens will lose many freedoms and will have to fall to the dictatorial oppression of the mighty EU. But what will especially be evil is that even the powerful figures of the EU member states will completely and consciously howl injustice with the wolves. And these will also be the ones who, with false and misleading pro-propaganda, will entice many citizens of their countries to join the EU, and since the citizens will be misled, they will no longer be strong in their own logical and sensible decision-making. Consequently, there must be talk of a dictatorial compulsion, when, in the coming years and decades, the citizens become enticed to an EU accession. Before that, also Switzerland will not be spared, for after the turn of the millennium at the latest, strong efforts of the irresponsible ones will occur in order to force an EU accession.
Unpleasant what you are saying. The old Confederates, who gave their blood for the freedom of Switzerland and the Swiss people, would probably turn over in their graves if they knew of all these things. But what lies ahead with the economy, etc.?
Unfortunately, it looks very bleak. The coming time will bring that very many enterprises of large and small style will be dissolved or be driven into bankruptcy by mismanagement and over-indebtedness. Unfortunately, this will also apply to the long-established firms and enterprises because their irresponsible ones will remove themselves from their leadership in order to arrive quickly at exorbitant wealth. which they will pay to themselves as compensations and settlements, and more, these compensation payments will be in the millions. Unhesitatingly and irresponsibly, the managers and directors of the firms, enterprises, and corporations will boundlessly get into debt and ruin these, whereby megalomania will be owned by these irresponsible ones just as much as extravagance, unpredictability, ignorance, and incompetence. All of this will become well known over time. But those in charge of legislative representation do not concern themselves with this, because they themselves will be partly involved in the mismanagement issues. For this reason, the criminal leaders of the firms, enterprises, and corporations will not be prosecuted by the courts, at least in most cases. Also, white-collar crime will greatly increase, while the offense amounts will rapidly skyrocket into the millions and hundreds of millions, and will even exceed the 1,000,000,000 mark, as this will also be the case with the mismanagement of the firms, enterprises, and corporations.
You are talking about millions and billions of Swiss francs, I assume.
That is of correctness.
Can you tell me one or two names of the enterprises that, in the coming time, will fall under your predictions?
There will be very many that will suffer major damage of a financial form, and that will go bankrupt, dismiss many workers, fall hopelessly into debt, or that will simply have to close the enterprise. But probably the most impressive, which will happen in the year 2001, will be the financial destruction of Swissair, as well as several of its affiliated foreign airlines and several suppliers.
You mean that Swissair will actually collapse?
Yes, that will undoubtedly be the case in the year 2001. A look into the future has proven this.
And what about the Sulzer Corporation?
It too will suffer and will dismiss many workers and sell large parts of the company. But these two upcoming events will only be a drop in the bucket, as you tend to say, because it all looks very bad for very many enterprises, firms, and corporations, which will also have reference to the federal fiscal house, because even in the upper house of Parliament, like already for a long time, there will be no authoritative power that will make the fiscal house profitable and that will be able to lead it to a reduction of its debts. Consequently, the Swiss government will continue to fall more heavily into debt.
Nice outlooks, but as an individual, one cannot change anything in these precarious matters, not even if one would go to vote for certain things.
That is of correctness, because the members of the parties determine the ballots according to the proposals, pleas, and orders that are given to them, for they are manipulated by the party superiors and are robbed of their own free opinion. Thus, the parties also determine who will exercise a dictatorship over their members, what will be voted yes or no. Individual votes of reasonable ones are thus of no use in elections.
I am also of the same opinion, which is why for as long as I have lived, I have never gone to a ballot box to cast my vote for or against something. But what all will still happen in the future, I mean specifically for Switzerland.
A great deal will arise there, but I would still like to mention a prediction to you. It will be in the years after 1995, when Switzerland will be confronted with old events of World War II, which will then also carry into the third millennium. A security guard by the name of Christoph Meili will find old data papers in a bank, which will be destined for the shredder, and which will show account details of the Jewish people from the last World War. The security guard will steal these papers and hand them over to a Jewish organization in Zurich, which will then cause serious consequences for the banks and Switzerland, whereby billions of sums will be demanded, which are supposed to be paid to the surviving relatives or to those who are still living, who will still have a right to the accounts. This Meili will flee to America during the course of the negotiations, even though the Swiss courts will have nothing on him. The true reason for his escape will be money, which he will then hope to receive from organizations for his treason against Switzerland. The whole thing will be but the prelude to ensure that the Swiss government and banks, as well as various economic enterprises, will be attacked several times for financial reasons of lawyers, especially by a lawyer named Fagin of American origin, who will be out for money and fame.
This indeed had to come. Those in power of Switzerland did not exactly exhibit the cleanest waistcoats at the time of World War II. Just think of the fact that in 1945, for example, these lunatics wanted to test atom bombs in the Gotthard region, especially just the powerful military figures, or that the Swiss Red Cross operated espionage during World War II at the war fronts, or that people were sentenced to death and executed by the Swiss military, whereby even innocents were simply gunned down. Unfortunately, I was able to look on such an execution myself, for my godfather, Alfred Flückiger, secretly led me to the execution site, where we hid ourselves in the bushes and were able to observe everything.
That is well known to me.
Good. In your remarks, you explained different things that you first mentioned recently. But how does it stand with the fact that in the coming time, something happens that will actually move the whole world? Will something actually occur as such? Or will everything remain the same as everyday life, which the Earth humans have already faced and have already been accustomed to for so long, whereby they are indifferent toward all events relating to this? Most people have become largely indifferent towards all misfortune, towards war, murder, torture, dictatorship and crime, etc. So something special would already have to happen to pull them out of their lethargy. So the question is whether something will happen in the coming time, such that it arouses something in the people, even if it may only be for a short time or for a moment.
According to our predictions, that will actually be the case. The marriage between the British heir to the throne, Prince Charles, and Princess Diana will end in divorce in August of 1996. In this respect, at least about the fact that this marriage will not be good, Sim Yase already reported to you at the beginning of the 80s. But this will not be the actual world-moving event that you asked for. But I think that the aforesaid, and what is yet to be said, will contribute to the event, because after the divorce, Princess Diana will lead a rather eventful life, will newly fall in love, and will die with her lover by a severe traffic accident. This will happen on the 31st of August in Paris at 0:35 Hrs, the vehicle, which will be driven by an ordered driver, with Diana and her lover, Ahmad Al-Fayed, who is called Dodi, will come to a road tunnel at the River Seine at very high speed and will skid and crash into a concrete pillar. Al-Fayed and the driver, Henry Paul, will die immediately, while the then 36-year-old Princess Diana, who will be critically injured, will be admitted to the hospital and will die shortly before 4 o'clock in the morning. The bodyguard will be the only one in the car with his seatbelt buckled, which will lead to the fact that he, though badly injured, will survive. A combination of different factors will lead to the disaster, namely that on the one hand, the driver, Henri Paul, will be under the influence of drugs and alcohol and will drive the vehicle at around 200 kilometers per hour on the road and through the tunnel, and on the other hand, what will also play a role is that Diana, along with her lover, will try to escape in the armored Mercedes 280S from the obtrusive paparazzi, who will bother her and pursue her on their motorcycles. Another vehicle that will be in the tunnel will be another cause of the accident, because through a side swipe of the same by Diana's Mercedes, the actual catapult process will be triggered. Nevertheless, a clarification of this process will not take place, so the actual circumstances of the event will not be clarified by the police and specialists, because even the other vehicle of a white color will not be able to be found. This will be the event, to which the entire world public will respond with dismay and sadness. On the 6th of September, the world will then take leave of Princess Diana, when a memorial service is held for her in England at London's Westminster Abbey.
See newspaper reports. Simya. Say Block 4, pages 72, 76.
Then another question. With us, the view prevails with the Earth humans that descendants would have to follow in the footsteps of their parents, usually in those of the fathers. By this, I mean that, for example, a son, or several sons, if there are several of these, would take on the same occupation of his father, or, if one or another exists, would take over his company or business and continue it on. How is this with you? Do the same views exist with you?
No, that is not the case. All descendants are entirely free in their choice of activity. So there is never a desire that children must perform the same activity, etc., as their parents, neither in relation to the father nor mother, and thus, neither a son nor a daughter. So, for example, parents can be an Ishwish and or Ishrish, while a son of theirs learns a simple craft, as this can also be the case for a daughter. Parents always only play an advisory role with their descendants, but it is never insisted by them that the descendants would have to turn to a specific activity, etc. And before you ask, this also has reference to the choice of a partner, as well as to the education of the descendants, and of course, also to the home of choice, etc.
I think that is good. It also corresponds to my sense. Then another question. Do you actually know a lot about the sailor's yarn?
You see me without understanding. What does sailor's yarn mean? The term is unknown to me.
Oh, excuse me. Unbelievable and fantastic stories that are told by sailors are called sailor's yarn.
Do you mean stories about calfaterns?
No, it has nothing to do with that. By the way, how did you come across that word?
It belongs to our German usage.
You can forget that word in order to try to make yourself understandable, for this term has no longer been in use for a long time. It traces back to an old German language and means a haunting around in a good or bad sense. However, this calfatern, respectively a haunt, is a matter of the ship's kobold man, which continues to be known as a ship's spirit, which means that the ship's kobolds are only of importance among the sailors, but not among the landlubbers. The ship's kobold, respectively the ship's spirit, so says the popular belief, but especially the sailor's belief, knocks against the ship's planks to warn the sailors that repairs to the ship's walls must be made. But on the other hand, the ship's kobold should also announce disaster, such as a severe storm, a plague on board, or even the sinking of the ship. So it can appear in difficult situations as a good spirit or as a goblin that brings misfortune and death to the ship and its crew. This is the sailor's belief and the popular belief.
Then the word clabastern would probably be right. Or is it clabastern?
No, because that means something else again. The term clabastern would be right. The word addressed by you is called clabastern and is a variant of clabastern. On the one hand, in the language of soldiers, it means that other humans, respectively recruits, are ruthlessly drilled and compressed together and then made into useful, obedient, and disciplined soldiers. On the other hand, clabastern also refers to the so-called clabaster beer. This is a product of impurity, namely with humans and animals. These are small, dried-up excrement residues, small balls of excrement that stick in the hairs around the anus. Wait a minute. It is probably here in the dictionary. One moment. Yes, here. It says the same thing as what I told you. Still in reference to Clubberster beer and the language of soldiers, it is said in jargon that Someone let the Klebesterbeeren fly from his ass.
A harsh language.
That is just so among the Earthlings. But back to the sailor's yarn. Since ancient times, sailors have told tales about sea monsters that they would have seen. And such monsters should have always had such enormous proportions that they should have pulled even large ocean-going vessels into the deep. In particular, these old stories exist about giant squid with enormously long tentacles. Have you ever tried to investigate these stories, and what should actually be thought of these, as well as of these sea monsters? Are these actually real, or is it all in the end just a great sailor fabulation?
These sailors' stories throughout the centuries are familiar to us, and we have, in fact, endeavored to clarify them. And even though many fabulations, as you say, can be found in these sailors' stories, there existed and there actually exists the described sea monsters, if one wants to call them such. At the same time, there are different genera, as well as specific species that developed from these. But so far, these have not yet been discovered, respectively have not been found, by the earthly researchers and scientists. And since you speak of squid in particular, I can tell you this, that there are actually such gigantic creatures in the oceans. It is just that they live at very great depths and only rarely come to the surface of the ocean. The largest of these giant squids, which we found at great ocean depths, so at a depth of more than 2,000 meters, exhibited a height of 25 meters, from which emerged 10 tentacles, which were 99.6 meters in length. But we only found this size among the cephalopods, while other gigantic animals only exhibited sizes of up to 52 meters, such as calamari.
Cephalopod, so squids, which are also known to us as cuttlefish.
That is of correctness. But now, you should slowly come to an end with your questions.
I will. But if you still have some time, then I would still have 2 or 3 questions to ask.
Certainly.
Good, thank you. How were Manoa and the Minoan culture destroyed? Do you know much about this?
The history of the earth and the history of nations fall into my area. Thus, I can give you information. 2 factors were to blame for the fall of the Minoan culture. Namely, on the one hand, the disorder of the Minoan society, which was very divided in some respects, and which created evil hatred in the various social structures, even due to the disagreement that the Minoan Empire threatened to fall apart. The cultural structures split apart, and soon the whole thing threatened to degenerate into a war of the entire citizenry, and thus of all levels of society. But before this could happen, a tremendous natural disaster occurred, namely as the Santorini volcano erupted and burst forth lava, gas, steam, and ash, whereby the ashes alone exhibited the large amount of 73.6 cubic kilometers. Also, vast sulfur fumes belonged to this, whereby the whole atmosphere was so polluted and shrouded in a veil that the sun was darkened, and climate changes emerged from this, which lasted for several years. Low temperatures arose from the veil of smoke and dust in the atmosphere, which caused many years of harvest failures. The bad and poor harvests led to the Great Famine during the following period. In addition, the Santorini volcano did the rest, for as a result of its powerful eruption and the subsequent explosion, which triggered gigantic tsunamis that devastated the large areas of the Minoan island when the waters raged across the island. Many buildings and lands were destroyed, while very many people lost their lives. The largest tsunami, however, the huge tidal wave caused by the explosion of the volcano, rolled far across the sea to Egypt, being red with the blood of countless slaughtered aquatic animals, whereby the river Nile then colored itself red, and many people in Egypt died. but the tsunami found no end in Egypt and rolled back into the sea, where it united with another tsunami, which was generated by the explosion of the Santorini volcano and rolled eastward, where the country was destroyed once again and people were killed when the wild waters penetrated into the country.
As a doctor, what do you know about breast cancer? What causes this?
As a rule, this suffering is of a gene-contingent nature.
And what gene is responsible for it?
I may not explain that officially, but may only tell you in confidence. What gene it concerns, the terrestrial scientists and researchers have to find out themselves, for our directives prohibit direct explanatory interference in foreign cultures and civilizations, in terms of progress, etc.
Good, accepted. So no other question about it. As it now stands with the climate of the Earth, however, it is always said that this is warming up. Does it actually become warmer?
The year 2001 will be the warmest one out of the previous 200 years until then, and global warming will still continue even after that. On the one hand, this warming has already been happening for decades through entirely natural processes and phenomena of the Earth and the Sun, as I already explained once before, and on the other hand, it also occurs through the unreasonable interference of the Earth humans on the climate, through air pollution and consequent production of a greenhouse effect.
Jmmanuel once told me something in connection with the movement of matter and light.
I can remember that because I was there when she told you that light can move any matter, and it actually does this.
Thank you. Yes, that's it, exactly. As you know, I have gathered and calculated a lot with regard to the Christian calendar. You have also told me that I had calculated very precisely and that only small errors were contained in my calculations. With respect to these calculations, I have endeavored again and recently discovered that the actual birth of Emmanuel must have taken place not 4, 6, or even 7 years before the Christian calendar, but rather 5 years. This means that Emmanuel effectively must have seen the light of this world 5 years before the Christian calendar. Through a look into the past, I also discovered that at the time of his birth, not only was a beaming spaceship visible in the sky, but also actually a very large comet which could be seen all over the world, namely for about several weeks.
Your explanations are correct. And since you alone have now found the true facts, nothing more stands in the way for me to tell you further details. The exact year of Emmanuel's birth was 5 years before the Christian calendar known today. At that time, there actually was a very large and unusually strongly radiating comet that was observable from the Earth, which we call the fruitful one. Because from very early times, inseminations for the Earth and for the planet Phaeton, respectively Malona, have gone out from it, whereby life could develop on these two SOL satellites. The fruitful one, however, has an extremely long period of revolution on a path that leads far out into the Oort cloud. Accordingly, it will take more than 11,000 years, according to Earth's measure of time, before a return of this comet occurs in the SOL system. Its orbital period is 13,200 years. Together with this event of the appearance of the fruitful one, the birth of Emmanuel also took place on the 3rd of February, 5 years before the Christian calendar, whereby the 3rd of February of today's calendar is converted for the time and the day of that time. At that same time, when Emmanuel was born, in order to monitor and supervise everything, a large Pleiaren beam ship was stationed high in the atmosphere over Bethlehem. This radiated very brightly, for it was one of those aircraft that collect energy from the atmosphere, which light up, radiating very strongly, when they penetrate into the area of the processing system, through which anti-gravity is produced.
Aha, then I still have one last question. Here in Switzerland, as well as in other countries, people who kill another human being under the influence of alcohol, or who knock another down and kill him with a vehicle, like in the case of my brother Carl, who died at the beginning of the year in this manner, are only very mildly punished. When a person is knocked down and killed, if the driver of the vehicle is drunk, usually only very small fines are imposed on the respective death driver, as this happened when my brother was knocked down and killed. The driver of the vehicle only received a fine of 300 francs. That was all. In the maximum case, if it ever has to come to this, a very short term of imprisonment might be imposed on such a death driver, which is so ridiculously short that it practically cannot be seen as a punishment, but as just a state holiday. What do you think of this, and how would your legislation judge these things?
Our laws clearly stipulate that if such an act was committed in a drunken state, then it would equal a serious felony, which would also accordingly have to be punished very harshly. Such an act is, in fact, a clearly deliberate act of murder, for if a person gets drunk on alcohol, he or she very well knows and is aware of the fact that in their drunken state, they lose control over themselves, over their mental competence, and over their reactivity, etc. But in the case of drunkenness, the cognition of this knowledge and this responsibility to be borne is deliberately disowned, whereby disasters, accidents, misfortunes, and crimes are casually accepted. Therefore, a person in a drunken state is undoubtedly fully responsible for their actions and deeds, and so they should also be punished accordingly, harshly, and impartially, like with any other delinquent and non-drunken and thus sober and fully conscious person, just as every crime is included in this. So drunkenness is never a reason for a reduced sentence, but on the contrary, it is a reason for severe punishment when a criminal offense, or even a felony such as murder, is committed. A reduced sentence can only ever be given when there are actually mitigating factors present, like with true mental incompetence. However, such is not given in the drunken state, namely for the explained reason that there is a prior, conscious knowledge of the potential disaster, misfortune, accident, and crime.
So in the drunken state, each form of killing, such as a crime resulting in death, etc., is effective murder.
That is correct. So it is also held in our laws.
Aha, and I thought that you only had weak alcoholic drinks and no more people who get drunk.
You misunderstood something. We have very weak alcoholic drinks, but the alcohol content is so low that it can only be measured as a small fraction of a % of alcohol content. Therefore, it is not possible that a person could get drunk on alcohol, not even if they could drink several liters of such a drink. Nevertheless, we still have an old conventional legislation that governs alcoholism, as well as intoxication by alcohol and acts of every kind that are committed in this state. So when one is killed or a crime is otherwise committed, or when any harm, accident, or misfortune is caused. But this legislation is already more than 5,600 years old and has never had to be put to use since that time, when our alcoholic drinks were reduced in their percentages in such a manner as I explained to you. Moreover, the people of our world have learned and have adjusted themselves to get by without alcoholic drinks, for these are not necessary for a normal and healthy lifestyle. Of course, wine, for example, can have a health-promoting effect, if this is enjoyed with measure and a goal, as this is also the case with other substances. But on our part, we have so aligned our food toward the highest possible health values that we have no longer needed alcoholic drinks for more than 5,600 years, which also eliminated the dangers of evil caused by drunkenness. Blelly. Oh, I see. I have actually misunderstood something there. But could I expect that you and maybe even Ptah would drink a glass of wine with me if I were to find you one? Nothing should prevent that, if it is a rare or unique case.
Of course, for I would not want to make you alcoholics, which I myself also would not want to be. Only, until it has come so far that I can enjoy some alcoholic drinks again, due to my collapse on the 4th of November, 1982, some time will still pass. Because for the time being, it's just impossible for me. Later, it will probably only remain a rarity if it should once again come so far that every now and then I might actually be able to drink a glass of wine or a small glass of liqueur if I can bear with my medication, but I must still leave this question open and cannot answer it yet. The future will show me what will be.
If it should be that you can take in some alcohol again, then I will confer with Ptah regarding your proposal.
Of course. I suppose that you have the freedom to decide for yourselves as to whether or not you want to drink alcohol. Or is there an ordinance that forbids this, thus, a ban?
No, that is not the case, because the abstention from alcohol is founded on a voluntary basis, so we can very well drink alcohol if we want.
And concerning this, how is it with your Federation members?
Some are inclined towards moderation in strong alcoholic drinks, but others act as we do. But even those who consume alcohol in moderation do not get drunk.
It is very pleasing to hear that in the vastness of space, there are people who, in this respect, and certainly in many other concerns, are much more rational and more responsible in their thoughts and actions than most of the Earth humans.
That is a word of truth. But now, my friend, it is time for me to tell you goodbye, for my duties call me. But I do not want to neglect to express to you my special thanks for your teachings with regard to the sailor's yarn and the ship's kobold and the other terms. Farewell now, and by the way, I am glad to see that you are making health progress, even if it still is not the best with your well-being. But even that will yet arise, as I have told you. Now farewell, my friend, and once again my best thanks.
Take care, Quetzal. It is my pleasure to have you as a friend. Goodbye.